glad it follows up the last one. I have a few. Some of the stuff that I present is a little different than the stuff that they talked about. So just to get a few things out of the way, a couple shout outs to some guys who helped me. Some of them could be here, some of them couldn't. There's a few folks who wanted to be nameless, so their names are printed in black. So we're going to kick it off. My neighbor and his kid are just annoying snots, right? Insert your own four-letter word. And God. And the problem is way too much discretionary spending, because then all of a sudden one day, this thing showed up. And the kid is following it around all over the neighborhood. And you can tell because he's crashing into every car, every house, every tree, and he's running down the street with it. And at night, it's really obvious what he's doing, because it just shows up. And it's like, really, dude, that's what the internet's for. Right? And my initial response on all that stuff is, maybe. Take that, you little bastard. But if you were here in the last presentation, they say shooting down drones is a problem. And that's okay. I don't want someone shooting down mine. But this got me to thinking. What if the following things were to show up? Such as maybe this. Not hard to do. It's actually made the news. Some guys up in New England started mounting semi-automatic pistols to their homemade drone. Interesting. What if this showed up? I can see the first shot being fairly accurate. After that, no one's business. What would happen if this showed up? Yet not as cool. So I started looking around online, and it turns out that there are a bazillion regulations, and everyone is trying to regulate unmanned aircraft systems, UAS, right? Which we call drones or quadcopters. And it turns out most of the regulations that are out there are not to restrict hobbyists. Most of them are there to restrict the government's use of quadcopters and drones. And there's a lot of attacking going on the commercial space where you have to get certain FAA approval to fly. And it turns out I was flying my DJI Phantom 3 while testing for this presentation over a parking lot, and I was watching it, and a guy came up right behind me, and he goes, "Hi, I'm actually from DHS's enforcement division for drones in the DC area." And I'm like, yeah. He goes, "Do you know what the rules are?" Yeah. He goes, "Are you doing this for commercial use?" And I said, "No." He goes, "Okay, see ya." And I followed him, and I wouldn't let him be. I'm like, "Hey, I got questions." He goes, "Dude, I have so many problems about guys flying those things around." And I said, "Well, what was your last problem?" He said, "A guy flew his quadcopter over National Stadium and lost it." And I said, "Well, how did you ever find the guy?" And he said, "Easy. Most of the guys who lose these things, you see them running over the hill with their controller. Have you seen my drone?" Right? And I'm like, "Really?" He goes, "Yeah," at which point we were waiting for him, and we scooped him up. But it turns out that non-commercial use, hobbyist use of drones is largely not regulated. There are a few things that are out there, right? There are no-fly zones around Washington, D.C., and it centers around the White House, and it goes out 15 miles. There's actually supposed to be a no-fly zone of 5 miles around the airports unless you get permission. Apparently, the ceiling is supposed to be graduated. As you get closer, the ceiling goes down, but FAA tries, in some of the literature, just say 5 miles, that's it. It turns out you're not allowed to fly on military bases. That's considered bad. This came up in the last presentation. You are not allowed to launch or land from a national park. However, you are allowed to fly in their airspace. It is not theirs to regulate. However, they can cite you for reckless endangerment if it potentially could crash on someone. and they get people on that, and they confiscate the drone there. There was a guy out over the Grand Canyon filming some sunset. People complained. You know, this guy in the Smokey the Bear hat showed up and took the guy away with his drone. There are temporary flight restrictions that are issued for disaster areas, wildfires, stadiums, large assemblies, and whenever there's going to be a presidential visit, and they do it several hours before and during the visit. You are not allowed to mount a gun on a UAS because technically it becomes a weapon system. There is a 400-foot ceiling. Amazon is now petitioning to try to get several hundred feet for themselves to deliver packages, and then they want a ban of 100 feet from everyone. You also have to fly within line of sight, and I have it now counted up to 16 states who have now enacted their own laws. And technically, according to the guys I spoke to at DHS who do enforcement, a lot of that airspace is not theirs to restrict. Now, the 5-mile area around airports essentially knocks out almost all of New York City, with the exception of a few parks. You're not allowed to fly above the sidewalks in New York City because of the reckless endangerment and safety issue. And then people get nabbed there. In the hobbyist area, there's a whole bunch of restrictions that come up, right? If you don't do it for commercial use, you're under 55 pounds, right? You're not interfering with any manned aircraft. You can be good to go. But that's nice and all, but most people don't know the rules because everyone and their brother is trying to create them. This is a listing of all the no-fly zones on the eastern side of the U.S. And damn, that's a lot of them. If you log into Parrot's website, this is a listing of all of the recordings that got automatically updated to their website that shows everyone who is flying on the eastern side of the U.S. Isn't that interesting? Over 2,000 flights in D.C., which is technically a no-fly area, and over 2,000 flights in New York City. If you do a quick overlay of the maps, yeah, turns out people are flying in areas that they don't know about. And if they're smart, you know, I say it's interesting, and that's nice and all that the rules are all there. But my neighbor's kid is still annoying, and I know he doesn't read, right? And he's not getting the appropriate parental guidance. So it brought me up with the bigger question, is there any way to take that thing down? Graceful or ungraceful? I thought there might be a couple of ways. There's a couple. I can think of a few ways. But maybe something a little more subtle would suit our needs. So maybe the next time he's there, he doesn't capture video. Maybe it knocks it down and it flies away. And if you've ever seen this guy crash, he actually bounces like that. So let's take a quick look. I'm going to take a look at 2 different drones, 2 of the more popular ones on the market. One is going to be the Parrot Bebop drone, which has a 1080p lens on the front. The other one's going to be looking at the new DJI Phantom 3. And if we start by looking at the Parrot drone, we get a rough listing of the specs. And it turns out, sure, we got a quad core, we got memory, we got a top horizontal speed of 45 miles an hour. Wow. Right, Linux, but if you look really carefully at the specs, the thing is its own flying router with DHCP enabled. Awesome. There's something else I found really interesting if you read the specs. It's got a really interesting GPS chip in there, using American GPS and Russian-based GPS. So what happens if I muck with that? Right? There's a couple other things that kick in. Easy for me to say, the Free Flight 3 app is installed on your Android device or your iOS device. You can get updates to that. If an update comes out, you don't have to forcibly install that update. You can ignore it. It doesn't come through the App Store. It actually is just sitting there. It checks their website, so you can apply the update. A couple other things that are interesting, the return to home function. And I'm sitting here thinking, all right, if he's flying near me and I want to swat it and get it away, maybe I can take advantage of the return to home function and send that thing back home. The height distance thing is very interesting. If the thing is flying above 10 meters, it will fly back to its original return to home point. If it's flying less than 10 meters, the thing will automatically shoot up 30 feet. turn, face home, and then fly home in a straight line. So if you have a house where you can pick up GPS and say you're in your living room with a ceiling fan, you may not want to hit the return to home feature because that gets very ugly fast. That's how I lost my first drone. There's something else I wanted to take a look at, and I see this in your documentation. If the Bebop drone loses connectivity with the controller for 30 seconds, this thing is supposed to fly home. That makes me want to say, what would happen if I screw with the Wi-Fi signal? Or what happens if I screw with GPS? Or what happens if I introduce a magnetic field around the thing? So let's go through it real quick. This thing actually flies with its own MAC address. It's running DHCP. We can actually scan this with a number of tools. I happen to have a Pineapple router around. I didn't use Darren Kitchen's Infusion, which is really cool. Actually, I didn't know that Infusion existed at the time. But it's neat. There's an underlying Wi-Fi connection that gets established between the two devices, and then on top of that, the applications talk to one another. So let's introduce ourselves a little mischief, shall we? What happens if we de-auth our original connection for, say, 30 seconds? It turns out the return to home function did not work correctly for me, and I did this like 5 times. I lost like 6 propellers at the time doing this test. Here's what it looks like when all of a sudden this thing gets de-authed for 30 seconds. It sits there and flies, boink, it just landed. All of the rotors stopped at the same time and it went straight down. Maybe it got lost, maybe you thought that was going to be home, I don't know. But clearly that didn't work, so now I can just walk out into my property and pick the damn thing up. You want it, kid? Come and get it. Maybe there's something else we can do. I got it. Let's give it a quick scan. And it turns out when we scan it with Nmap, yup, it's a flying FTP server just floating around. Oh, that's awesome. I had 10 devices simultaneously connected to this guy all at once. Only one app was talking, but the other 9 were sitting there waiting. We'll get back to that in a second. It turns out this thing is a flying FTP server, and there are 2 particular directories I found interesting. One was the media directory, where the little monster next door was filming videos, and the other was the thumbnail directory. No authentication was required to connect over FTP. I think that's fantastic. So I was sitting there and thinking, while it was in flight, maybe I can grab his pictures and replace him with something like that. That was a fun day. Yeah, well, that was cool. All right, so I'm taking the videos you got of all the neighbors because maybe I want to just see what they look like. But then there's this monstrosity, Telnet, wide open, while the thing is flying, which kills me. So I Telnet directly into the box, and here's a listing of the entire directory structure right there. Now it's running BusyBox from like 3 years ago. Right, this thing I purchased just a couple months ago for this presentation, and they never updated BusyBox. There have been something like 10 updates to BusyBox since this came out, but they haven't updated it. But I want you to look really carefully at 3 things for me. Take a look at those shell scripts sitting right there. So, I took drone number 2. This gets to be a very expensive research project soon. He was hovering in my kitchen. I Telnet directly to the box, and all of a sudden I see that. I'm like, that's pretty cool. So I wonder what happens if I type in this and hit enter. I am suddenly greeted with all of that. I was sitting there working in the kitchen. It was hovering, and then all of a sudden, it took out my stove. I was thinking the shutdown feature would gracefully just shut down the rotors and down it would go. This thing There was no graceful shutdown. It literally flew right by, and I'm like, wow. So if I was one of those cool dudes who got like carbon fiber blades, this is what it looks like in the park. It's flying, hit the command there, boink, and down it goes. There is no restart from that, right? If you go look at some of the software exploits that are out there, it kills a running process and the thing fires back up. This is off. It's done. By the way, in case you missed it, because it always looks better in slow motion, if it's running near a wall, it gets updraft and there's no telling where it's going to go. I was going to do that in here today. I fired this up this morning and 6 wonderful conference attendees had connected to my open telnet connection. I'm not bitter, but you did steal my thunder. So there's another thought. I mean, shutting that thing down, great. So I had a coworker who looked at this and said, you know, that's not really epic. You should launch that thing like 400 feet in the air and crash it. And I'm like, well, give me your drone. So why don't we just take the damn thing, right? Okay, you knocked your ball into my yard. I'm going to take it. So we actually have 2 simultaneous connections to the same drone at the same time. If I am sitting there, and again, remember, I had like 10 devices all connected to it simultaneously. This is what it looks like from the iPad that is currently controlling the Bebop drone. It has access. It's hovering at 1 meter. I ran this inside a hotel lobby. They were not happy. This is what my iPhone sees. Okay. I'm connected to the network, but my app's not connecting. This is what we have. Hey, wait a second. Why don't I just send a quick DOF? The moment that DOF kicks in, the controller automatically says, I'm disconnecting. Right away. He is automatically having a bad day. So the question I have for you is, in this race condition, who's going to win? If he is running an iPad anywhere near indoors, he is going to pick up his home network or any other network before he picks up his Bebop drone connector, which I think is great, which means he is going to sit there and try to reconnect even though his underlying network connection is not there, and it's going to freeze. Meanwhile, on my iPhone, I've connected. I'm there, and I was sitting there and I connected because I DOF'd him, my Wi-Fi connection was good. Note the altitude list though on this. It now thinks that is 0. The thing was 3 feet in the air, so it didn't get an update for that, which means I'm off and running, and now I am the guy who is in charge of that drone, and he can't do anything about it. If I click the button at the top that says emergency, that thing just falls from the sky and away it goes, which I think is great. One of the other things that kicks in with the Free Flight app that runs on top of the network connection, again, it's going to pair to any other network before it comes back to this particular drone, and I think that's fantastic. Now, for those little enthusiasts who have more money, the Bebop drone comes with an optional Sky controller that looks like this. It's supposed to be a range extender. It turns out that that is its own wireless access point too. And it's wide open, which means we can DOF in one of 2 spots. If we DOF between the iPad, which is literally just sitting in the cradle, it is not tethered, it's just sitting there connecting wirelessly. If I DOF that and I connect my iPhone or my iPad to it, all of a sudden I get these little controller icons sitting right there, which means I have control of you. If I'm nice, I will temporarily send control back to your controller, and then I'll steal it away from you. And I can go back and forth, which means he's going to respond all over the place, which means he's mine. I don't have to worry about it. I mean, I think coding would be great, writing an exploit would be great, but the app is free. It's already been developed, and Telnet's wide open. So what happens if we start looking around at other areas like GPS, right? And This is interesting because if you pull up the specs, there are several very specific frequency ranges used in the US, several specific ranges used with the Russian GPS system. What if we screw with those signals? Now, there's one teeny tiny little problem with that. It's illegal. Like 18 different ways of illegal. Like you are currently fined $16,000 for every day that you do this, up to $112,000. And if you go to the FCC's website, they have a spot where you can report people. They list of all the people that they've sent notices to and fined. So what to do? I talked to the DHS guy. I said, hey, I was thinking about doing research, and his flat answer was, are you going to cite my name? And I said, of course not. He goes, they would never catch you if you do it just once. They can't. Okay, so I spoke to an attorney. An attorney said, yeah, it's still illegal no matter what. They could still come get you. I'm like, you're no fun. I was speaking to a cop, and he said, you know, if you go back and read the specific intention that shows up on the FCC site, they don't want you to put anyone in danger, right? You can't disrupt anyone else's signal. If you showed up here 20 miles away from everything in the woods and you were being supervised, hypothetically, you could test and no one would know. I'd like to introduce you to my new friend. Selling and manufacturing and importing and all that good stuff related to GPS jammers is illegal. This is a GPS test generator. And hypothetically, one could pick this up online for a very reasonable price of $25. He is specifically designed to block these particular frequency ranges. He also has an effective range of about 20 meters, which is kind of creepy. So I go out, hypothetically, with some people to do a test, and I'm sitting there observing. We do the test, at which point the police officer says, I'm going to take your equipment now. I'm like, really? He goes, yes, there's no way I can let you walk away with that. And it's gone, so it's been confiscated in history. But if we were to run that type of generator on the Bebop drone while he was flying, the return to home feature automatically fails instantly. From the point of view of the drone, it is currently flying, it has GPS, and then all of a sudden, everything stops. He automatically goes to hover mode. He doesn't move forward, he doesn't move back, he just freezes. And if he gets GPS signal again, he doesn't resume his take-home function, he just stands there. Well, I lost. And he's just looking around, which I think is a very interesting thing. Now, it doesn't overwrite what the home position is, it just interrupts the flight home. The same thing could be achieved if you flew under a bridge, or if you were underneath some dense trees. All of a sudden, this thing just stops in place, which can be a problem. Introducing a magnetic field around the device, say magnets from hard drives, actually had no observable effect on the guy, which was a little disappointing for me. Now, if you're thinking about taking over someone's drone, say at the hotel at 6 o'clock in the morning, you bastards, there's going to be references on your devices that you've made connections to the device. Very specifically, you want to take a look at the free plist file from your iOS devices and delete that, because that will have date stamps, timestamps, and the serial numbers of my drone in your phone. So you might want to smudge them out if you can. And I think that works. So this thing, I would never fly it around any of you, ever. What if we took a look at something bigger, though? Something bigger than the Bebop drone. Okay, not that big. Maybe if we took a look at the Phantom 3 that just came out this past June, what could we do there? If we look very specifically at these specs, this thing is designed to have certain geofencing in place because of the incidents that occurred earlier this year. It can fly up to several hundred meters away without an issue. The top horizontal speed is about 35 miles an hour on that. It uses both GPS systems as well. In some geofenced areas, it will give you a notice that says, warning, you're in a bad spot. And the other ones, it's supposed to automatically take it down, where it uses an automatic landing sequence. This thing is very freaky with respect to magnetic fields, though. it requires constant calibration if you're going to take off anywhere near a magnetic field, and I find that interesting. Electromagnetic field interference, I think that's pretty cool. DJI Phantom 3 updates. I've heard this from other presenters, and I respectfully disagree. Whenever an update comes out by DJI for my Phantom 3, I get a warning message right before I take off, and it says, sorry, dude, you cannot take off until you apply that update. And I'm like, really? It's like, I contacted their tech support on 3 different occasions to get 3 different guys, and I said, hey, what's the deal with your updates? And they're like, sorry, man, that's the way it is. We have an update, you have to apply it to your device. There's no way around it. And I'm like, what if I want to roll back? They're like, I'm like, what if it fails partway through? They're like, dude, you're screwed. I'm like, that's your answer? He goes, pretty much. Insert the micro SD card, try again. So, let's kick it off. What happens if we disrupt the Wi-Fi signal going to a Phantom 3? Well, it turns out it doesn't do anything because the Phantom 3 doesn't operate over Wi-Fi, which is kind of cool. But it brings up the other question of what happens if we start to disrupt the GPS signal. Now, if you look very carefully at the GPS app, I'm not talking about what's installed on the device itself. I'm talking about the app itself. It turns out there's a little teeny tiny database called Fly Safe Places. And it's very interesting. As of July 24, that database had 10,914 entries. It contained the latitude and longitude of all of the no-fly places that were listed in it. It contained the country ID, the city, the name of the location, what type of shape was around it, what the radius was, whether or not it was going to issue a warning to the user, whether or not it was going to issue a disable, and then there was a timestamp as to when it was added to their database. I very easily downloaded this database and started just changing entries, which I found to be very interesting. So when the DJI Phantom 3 is flying, you get something that looks like this in a very nondescript area. At the very top, it shows a safe to fly GPS indicator. No problem, there's a map in the lower right corner. Hypothetically, if someone were to turn on a GPS test signal generator, all of a sudden everything goes to this. It automatically loses GPS. If I am flying the device and I start to look at its own diagnostics, it comes back and tells me what frequencies it is using to send video signals back to my iPad. When GPS is disrupted, all of a sudden things start getting squirrely. It turns out my video started to become choppy. It had a lot of latency. It also turns out when the return to home feature was working, it lost GPS. The thing was flying. Home could be right here, and here it comes, and here it goes. Hey, there it goes. It missed its home point completely. Flew by it. If you've flown a DJI Phantom 3, has anyone here flown a DJI Phantom 3? Aren't they awesome? Lots of finesse to it, right? Not a whole lot to it. All of the finesse to my Phantom 3 was completely gone. It's like I was flying this thing all over again. So I'm sitting there and controlling it. I was taking it. It turns out it almost hit someone. They got a little upset. So in slightly windy conditions, or if you're near a building, hypothetically, there's a downdraft, and then all of a sudden he becomes unstable and he crashes. So it's a combination of the windy conditions and where it's flying, along with losing GPS if it started with GPS, which I think is a very interesting thing. There's something else I also notice. What happens if we play around with the magnetic field around our DJI Phantom 3? It turns out whenever it launches, if it can't get a good magnetic compass reading, it's going to say, hey dude, I can't fly until I get calibrated. So you pick it up, you turn it on all 3 axes, it says I'm calibrated, you set it back down. If it loses that magnetic field, guess what happens? Sorry dude, I got to recalibrate again. And you're like, really? I just calibrated you. You pick it up, you twist it, you roll it, you're good to go. So if you were to fly it and say, take a couple hard drives from, say, some of your old hard drives, hypothetically you left them in the area, this thing is not taking off. It'll never get off the ground, which I found to be really interesting. It is very sensitive in that area. A lot of things going on. D-off on the Bebop drones and any of the Parrot series very quickly disassociates the controller with the device. Yeah, you got to that bottom line, did you? GPS interference definitely screws up the return to home function. It causes the device to stop, and the other one, it misses its home sequence. If you take a look at the magnetic field, you can't launch with the DJI Phantom 3. It has a lot of performance issues. And then lastly, sure, there's physical objects we can always throw at the things instead of shooting it down just to kind of mess with our people. There are tons of references in this space on looking up what people are doing, what regulations are there. They are constantly changing. People are passing laws, regulations in all sorts of jurisdictions based just on personal opinion. Well, I just don't want them in my space because it'll annoy my quiet time at the beach. Okay, well, your screaming kid annoys me at the beach, all right? I'm not spamming him and sending him away. Leave my drone alone, right? But there's all sorts of rules. You can also go through and take a look to see which type of frequencies are allowed in different regions and which ones aren't. So it's going to vary from country to country. It was a fun research project. I knocked my neighbor's kid and his drone offline. Thanks. I'm almost afraid to do this. Do you have any questions?
I have a question.
Yes, sir. You in the front.
Can you get a wireless mic so I can get other people's questions?
Good afternoon, everybody. My name's Paul Wilson. Welcome to the Art of the Con. And it's not the art of the convention. The art of the con game is as old as human civilization. And since the first sucker got taken until today, the principles of deception have been essentially the same. I've been interested in this since I was 8 years old. That's 35 years of my life dedicated to any information I could find about how con artists, cheaters, and casino players can beat the house. Now, luckily for me, about 5 years ago, about 10 years ago, I got involved in film and television. But about 5 years ago, I did a TV show called The Takedown. And this was an attempt to take some of my experience as a casino player. I was an advantage player in Europe for several years. And my experience in cheating and conning that I had picked up from my friends. I've never been a thief, and I don't consider card counting theft. I consider it thinking at the table. But I've never been a thief. I've never stolen from anybody in my life that I'm willing to admit to you right now. But I have been very lucky to have a mind for deception. Very interested in magic and conjuring. I think these people think in very similar ways to people who think, how can we beat a casino game? And I've been developing this knowledge over all of my life. And about 5 years ago, we did The Takedown, which is an opportunity to walk into casinos with a camera crew, pull off scams, and then explain how we did it. Sometimes we got arrested. Sometimes we walked out with all the money. And right after that, I did a TV show called The Real Hustle. Thank you very much to that guy. And I wrote and presented The Real Hustle for 11 seasons. The last season finished this year. And over that time, I've performed over 400 cons and scams on real people with hidden cameras. Despite what the papers have tried to claim, it was proven that we do this with people completely unaware. Nobody is complicit except for the person who set that person up. So I got the opportunity to pull every single scam I had ever heard of and many more that I had never heard of. And that means that I pulled more scams than anyone in history. No con artist ever had to pull 400 different scams in his career unless he was a complete idiot. Luckily, that was my cue. So, to talk about the art of the con, let's talk a little bit about how cons work. Basically, they all work in the same way. In some cons, the hook is bigger than a small con. You might just have a simple little suggestion. And a big con, it might be something that you keep going for many months or even years. So, they all work the same way. Let me give you an example. Let's say someone walks up to you in a bar, and they bet you that they can make you turn over your hands without even touching you. Now, it's important that this is in a bar because you need to be drinking for this to work. But let's try it. If you have something in your hands, please put it down. Okay? And I want everyone to put both your hands out in front of you. All right? Palm up like this. Okay. Everybody who just turned their hands over owes me $10. And there's a guy over here who turned his hands over, realized what was happening, and turned them over again. You turned your hands twice, sir. You owe me 20. This is what we would call a confidence trick. It's a very simple confidence trick, but it illustrates how they all work. Now, if you want to understand how confidence tricks work, the first thing you should do is look in a dictionary. If you look in a dictionary, look up the word confidence, first of all, and you'll find that these are incredibly apt. The feeling or belief that one can rely on someone or something. Imagine what you can do with that. It has other meanings as well. The state of feeling certain about the truth of something. Again, with someone's confidence, you can really abuse a situation. And if you look at the last, a feeling of self-assurance arising from one's appreciation of one's own abilities or qualities. This is a particularly important one because everybody thinks they're smarter than everybody else. And if you let them think that, you can take them for the biggest ride of their lives. Now, I've proven this in many different ways. I've been in a room talking to potential TV producers, and they said, you seem like an ordinary guy. We're looking for the dog, the bounty hunter of confidence games. I said, so what you're looking for is a guy with slick black hair, little pencil mustache, maybe wears a pinstripe suit. That's the guy you're looking for? That would be great. I says, yeah, he wouldn't make a penny. Because con artists look like me, and they look like you, and they make you feel better than them. It's one of the keys to being a good confidence artist. But there are two words, confidence and trick. Just for interest, I decided to look up trick as well. Oh, incidentally, that's one of the keys to the con. A con game is about giving the mark confidence, the victim. It's not about being confident as the con artist. I can do that all day. But if I can give you confidence, now we're talking. So what about trick? Well, there is a trick to all of these things. But if you look up trick, it's not quite as clear as confidence. First of all, skillful act or illusion performed for entertainment. Well, there's nothing particularly entertaining about losing your house. But there is an act of skill, and there's certainly a little bit of an illusion to a con game. But if we look down, a practical joke. No one's laughing. One of the things about con games, and someone I respect a great deal said that it's a soft crime. But in actual fact, I don't think it is a soft crime. I think it's one of the hardest crimes of all. Someone mugs you in the street, shows you a gun and says, give me all your money. You give them all the money and you think, well, that guy had a gun. What else could I do? But if I talk you into handing me over every penny in your savings account, you spend the rest of your life blaming yourself. And that's completely the wrong thing to do. Con artists are much better at conning you than you are at not being conned. So a practical joke definitely isn't the right way to look at it. Let's see what the next one is. Well, in a con game, someone definitely gets screwed. But this is a fair business agreement, so I wouldn't call that a particularly good one. I found this one, by the way. I just included it for completeness. A sailor's turn at the wheel or helm, usually lasting for 2 or 4 hours. I have no idea what that is, unless it's a euphemism I haven't heard yet. Here's the real one. A cunning or skillful act or scheme intended to deceive or outwit. So how do con games affect any form of security? There it is. To get around any system, to get through any wall, you have to have some knowledge of deception, some idea of how you can get around that wall, through the wall, under the wall, over it, or ignore the wall entirely. And people who build walls think completely differently to the rest of us. So a cunning or skillful act, is there anything you do that's cunning or skillful? Is it designed to outwit or deceive? Now remember, we've been doing this for centuries in con games. Now we're doing it online. And the thinking is incredibly similar. So, how do you spot a potential mark? Well, today it's anybody with a digital device. Anybody could be a victim. But here's the way that you can spot a mark for a con game. I'm talking about a classic con game, the kind of thing I might pull on you. It's absolutely 100% guaranteed. A 100% guaranteed way to spot the victim, potential victim, of a con or a scam. If you think you cannot be taken, you're just the person I want to meet. They are the greenest grass to a con man. They're the field that we want to dig up. Because if you think you can't get conned, we're going to confirm that for you all the way until we have everything from your bank account. So look in a mirror, because there's always a con that'll get you. Now, I know this for a fact. I literally have pulled every con in the book. What this means is I live my life in a state of paranoia. If you were to ask me, how do you avoid being conned? Don't talk to anyone, don't leave the house, don't buy anything, basically live in a cave for the rest of your life. You can be conned anytime, and so can I. So, a little bit of understanding about how con games work will help you. I'm going to talk about how they work. I'm going to talk about why they work. I'm going to show you some very interesting slides with my friend Jason England in a little bit. But afterwards, we're going to talk about how to protect people. We don't have a lot of time. I'm going to try and get it through it pretty quickly. So let's talk about the con. Every con comes in 3 phases. As I said before, the length of those phases depends on the type of con you're talking about. Hook, line, and sinker. Now, there are 2 other phases that we'll get to in a minute, but these are the keys to getting someone to hand over their keys. The hook is to set the bait and rope the mark. Now, some cons will work for pretty much everybody. Those are pretty rare, but most cons will work for huge percentages of the population. The secret, is, of course, is to finding out who wants to take the bait that you put on that hook. Today, you can send 10 million emails and figure out who's going to come back to you. And there are reasons why people come back to you. It isn't just because they're stupid, and it isn't because they're greedy. There are many more factors at work. People get involved with cons because it's something that they want. And something that they want is really important, because if I know what you want, I will take everything that you have. And the hook is all about that. The hook is about putting something that you want on the table and then figuring out a way to get you to buy it, even though the whole thing is a lie. So let me start by telling you about this game here. It's a game called The Razzle, and it's been around for a very long time. It's a carnival game. So it's not exactly the biggest con in the world. It certainly isn't Bernie Madoff. But it's one of the most interesting scams that I've ever learned. Now, when I worked for the BBC, they told me that I absolutely must not ever say something like, "This is my favorite scam," because, you know, for PR reasons, that's not the kind of line you want to say. This is my favorite scam. Now, the reason this is so brilliant is because it appears so simple and it appears so easy to understand. The Razzle is a game played on the Midway. It's been played in private clubs. They've even, in Blackpool in the UK, they had little garages that they set. They'd open it up and bring people to them to play. And once they went in there, they wouldn't leave until they lost all of their money. The only other reason they'd leave is to go and get more money. Now, the way the game works is simple. As you can see, there's a cup. There are 8 marbles in play. You also have this board here that has a bunch of little indentations. These are all numbered. When the marbles are rolled, they fall into those little holes, and then the numbers are counted up to give you a score. And that score is compared to this. So here we have a classic Razzle board. It tells us, for example, that if you were to get 15 points, if we were to add up all of those marbles, you would then get 1.5 points. And if you get 10 points on a little slider, we'd have a little point slider for you. If you get 10 points, you would win. Now, the hook is the most important part to get people involved. If you want to rope the mark and get their interest, it's all about the hook.